Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Before we get into this video, I would like to thank everyone. Over the last 3 or so weeks, my channel has been growing like crazy, and I really appreciate it. Joining me on today's video of camping and hiking scary stories is Lighthouse Horror and Entropic Society. Their links and timestamps for the story will be in the description. If you like their narration, please go sub to them. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I live in Michigan. I was 16 years old when these events happened. I'm a huge athletic nerd, and I go hiking every day unless I feel lazy. I picked the wrong day to go once, and I met and experienced something that I don't want to experience ever again. I drove to the hiking trail that I go to just about every time I go hiking, and on this day I saw a creepy guy that looked like he was in his mid-30s, but me being stubborn and hard-headed as I was back then, I ignored my gut feeling and went and started jogging around the trail. I took a short glance at him and started going down the trail. I got about 200 to 300 yards from the entrance and took a short break until I heard a scream of what sounded like a man. And I looked down the path and my heart dropped. I saw the guy running straight towards me. As my adrenaline rushed into me, I started to run as fast as I could. This guy was running so fast and he was catching up with me, and I was a really fast runner. This guy ran like he had taken 2 shots of steroids. As I started to cry in panic, I took a sharp turn into the woods and started to run back to the parking lot area. I kept hearing footsteps not far behind me, but they began to get slower as I got closer and closer to the parking lot. At last I made it to the parking lot, and I cried tears of joy as I took out my phone to call the cops. Not long after they arrived, they searched and found the man. He was a homeless guy, 37 years old. They said they found a butcher knife in his coat pocket. Till this day I'm glad I did ROTC throughout high school, or else I wouldn't have had the energy. Creepy manic homeless guy, let's never meet again. About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground, the Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I love that park so much. I rode more miles on my bike there than anywhere else. I've walked nearly every trail and rode every road. Every day, I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, I rode a bit further than usual. On my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roaming, and there's a large spring fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a long stone bridge, across a creek, then up a road to my home. It was dark at this time, and I had to use the full moon to see. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I felt a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise, like something hit the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. Me being confused, I start looking up the side of the hill. Just as I turn my head, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hits my front wheel. My eyes are finally adjusted, and I see a very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill throwing something at me and screaming. I yelled that I had a cell phone and I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one, as I wasn't at the age to have a cell phone yet. This seemed to piss it or him off more. He started charging down the hill at me. I, for obvious reasons, lit up my bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a large splashing noise in the creek and saw a large rock that had been thrown. I was in the clear to get home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station the next morning and told the ranger about what happened. He says, "So you were attacked by Bigfoot?" while snidely laughing. I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me there. Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot encounters, I'll let you know what we get. I just said fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight when the park rangers pulled up next to me and told me to get in. I asked why. He said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town. Before we got out of the car, he turns to me and says, "Justin, I owe you a huge apology. I will be honest, I didn't believe the story you told me about you being attacked. However, it has come to my attention that a couple was in the same area last night and was attacked in the same way. They told me that some large hairy creature was throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police, and the police came out with some rangers, including myself. I immediately thought of what you told me. When we arrived, we started up the hill. Sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. We drew our guns, yelling, and 2 officers tackled the man to the ground. He was 6'5", naked, covered in mud with long hair and a large beard. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake. Apparently he thought that he was back in Vietnam and that he was trying to take out the enemy. The park ranger continued to say that I was very lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what had happened. After that, they had sent him to a more secure facility somewhere else. To this day I get shivers when I hike the trail, and I'm always keeping an eye on the ridge top. I do feel bad for his PTSD and other mental illnesses, but crazy naked Bigfoot man, let's not meet again. At the end of May 1999, I was headed into my freshman year of high school. That summer, me and a group of 6 girls from my church went on a mission trip up to the coast from Riverside, California to Mount St. Helens, Washington. 3 of the girls' mothers acted as our drivers and chaperones. We basically all piled into an old Chevy van and a station wagon, headed up Pacific Coast Highway, and had a trip of a lifetime. I got baptized on this historic mission in San Luis Obispo. We spent 3 days in San Francisco, saw the Capitol. We went to Portland, Oregon, Yosemite. Basically, we got to see every worthy landmark and stay in every noteworthy town from SoCal to the Canadian border. When we stayed in Yosemite Park, we spent 3 nights at the Cedar Lodge. While in Yosemite and sightseeing, the old Chevy van died in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, even though we weren't able to get a cell signal, within an hour someone stopped to help us. This was so long ago that I don't remember the details, but basically, the owner of the van told us later that the mechanic told her someone had tampered with the engine. She was very upset by this and said it was something done intentionally. The van had to be abandoned and we had to use a rental the rest of the way. I don't know if this is a coincidence, but turns out that Carrie Anthony Stainer, also known as the Yosemite Killer, was the maintenance man for the Cedar Lodge during this time. He had murdered and decapitated a park ranger by the time that we were guests at the lodge. The very next month, he gained access to a room where a woman and her young daughter and her daughter's young friend were staying. He said he was there to check the room for something. Basically, he knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and because he worked at a lodge, they opened the door. He abducted them, then raped, murdered, and decapitated them. I can't say that I remember seeing him, but we probably did as we were there for 3 nights. It's just one of those things that I look back on and think he could have easily knocked on one of our doors, as it was just a few weeks before he decided he wanted to abduct and kill us. I feel incredibly lucky we dodged that bullet. If the time frame wasn't so close, it wouldn't creep me out as much, but it continues to haunt me 16 years later. I was still young when this happened, so I don't really remember it. So this is a story that my mom told me. When I was 5 or 6, my family and a family of friends all went camping together one summer in New Hampshire. Each family had a camper, and we were all set up in one campsite. The campground had a playground and a lake nearby, and there was always something going on. One day, my friend Kelsey and I, who was around the same age as me, were playing outside of our campsite as our moms talked outside of the camper, keeping an eye on us. At some point, an old man came walking by our campsite. He seemed like a normal guy according to my mom, but then he started to walk up and start a conversation with our parents. He said that he owns the campsite a little ways down the path, and he said he had a little playground behind his camper. He then said that my friend and I are allowed to come over anytime we wanted to play in his campsite. My friend's mom was oblivious to the situation and told him that was a very nice gesture and we could possibly go by later. My mom, on the other hand, who had experiences with creeps, shut him down and told him no and to go away. He walked away and my mom's friend started asking my mom why it was such a big deal. My mom told her that there was already a playground at the campground and that we were not allowed to go over there under any circumstances. She even went around to other campsites to warn people about this man and to stay away from him. Weeks passed, the camping trip was over, and everyone was home for the rest of the summer. My mom was doing things around the house and she gets a phone call from her friend from the camping trip. Her friend is freaking out, apologizing, telling her that she would never go against her judgment again, and tells my mom to turn on the news. When my mom turns on the TV, there he is. Apparently he had gone to the local pharmacy and tried to get some pictures developed. They found hundreds of pictures of underage girls and child pornography, including his infant granddaughter. So creepy guy in the campground, I pray we don't meet again. Since I posted this story, I talked to my boyfriend and his mom about this story. Apparently my boyfriend's family used to go to the same campground and actually knew this person I was talking about. He would fix the bikes of the kids in the campground, and even my boyfriend's. This is an insane coincidence, and I thought that I would share.
About 4 years ago, I was a junior at a small college in LA County. Bordering my town was a large cavernous region known as Turnbull Canyon. It's the kind of place that has a healthy amount of creepy folklore surrounding it, with an area empathetically known as Hell's Gates. Stories of cultic activity, gang killings, abandoned mental institutions, and the like. The kind of shit you hear about any place old enough to have a reputation. In reality, most of the stories were spurned from a tragedy that occurred years prior. A woman's body was found at the base of the canyon, and from then on, the rest is history. Nevertheless, when a photographer friend asked me and another buddy to go out to the canyon in order to take some photos of the LA skyline, I had to oblige. The canyon was about a 30-minute drive from our campus, and we had been listening to the King of Limbs the entire drive, which proved to be the perfect ambiance to get me feeling pretty anxious about our little excursion. I should also note that I'm a pretty anxious guy in general, so traveling out to a remote area preceded by its reputation for scary occurrences admittedly had me thinking twice about the decision. At the top of the canyon, there's a small residential area, a few ritzy houses, surrounded by trees and woods. In order to venture into the canyon itself, you have to follow a main trail with several smaller arteries that split off in other directions, but ultimately culminate, after a couple miles or so, at the base of a steep hill adorned with an old water tower overlooking the city. Anyhow, we parked our car at the top of the canyon road, divvied up the camera gear, and made our way out to the trailhead around 1 a.m. at this point. After walking the trail for about 5 minutes, Dave, the photographer, decided it was time to set up his first shot while Jeff, our other friend, and I kept watch. Eventually, he got the shot he needed, and we continued walking for another 5 or so minutes before Dave decided to set up his next shot. At this point, the trailhead had disappeared behind us completely, and we were a little less than a quarter of the way to the water tower. While setting up the tripod, we noticed the faint glow of headlights off in the distance, which was strange because the trail isn't meant for cars, nor is it big enough for them to pass through. If I recall, it's only about 5 feet wide with shrubbery on both sides. This was clearly a bit of a red flag for us as we were the only people out there, so we immediately packed up our things and ducked off into the brush, waiting for the car to pass on. Eventually, an old pickup truck idled to a stop about 50 yards from where we were hiding. The truck itself was old and rickety, sitting on a lifted chassis, the bed of which was missing entirely. Growing up in the country, I knew it as the type of truck typically owned by backwoods folk who lived in the boonies and preferred to be left to their own devices. We watched in agonizing anticipation as the truck just idled in place for several minutes before flooring it down one of the other trails, the roar of the engine echoing throughout the canyon. Clearly, we were spooked at this point, the three of us speculating as to our next step. Jeff and I were reluctant to continue, while Dave assured us that it was probably nothing. Perhaps just a guy off-roading, as he put it. So, with great reluctance, Jeff and I trudged on behind Dave toward the water tower to get his final shots. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the truck. I mean, I knew plenty people in high school who would go off-roading for fun in the woods, but never on finicky canyon trails barely wide enough to hike on, let alone drive. It just didn't sit right with me. After walking without interference for about an hour, we finally made it out to the water tower, climbed the hill to the top, and took in the view of the city. Dave, once again, started setting up his equipment while Jeff and I stood on both sides of the water tower, keeping watch just in case the truck came back. Nothing. At this point, it's around 3 a.m. Dave decides that he's got all the shots he needs, so we pack up our equipment and commit to heading back before it gets too late, seeing as how all of us have classes in just a few hours. Just as we're preparing to descend the hill, the truck comes roaring out of the canyon below us, back onto the trail, at which point the driver attempts to climb the hill, revving the engine loudly. Scared shitless, the three of us slid off the side of the hill into the brush, clinging to plants and rocks. As the truck finally made it atop the hill, slowly driving around the tower, we could see the glow of the headlights each time it circled above us. After waiting for nearly 10 minutes, while also not trying to make any noise, the truck eventually descended the hill, stopping in the middle of the trail not more than 100 yards away. We watched as a scruffy man mid-50s stepped out of the idling truck and into the glow of the headlights, moseying around while looking at the ground. He then knelt down, looking at something in the dirt, surveying the area intently. As he did so, it became increasingly apparent that he was tracking something. Our footprints. This next part still chills me to the bone. As my friends and I huddled together watching in complete terror, another man wearing a long dark parka emerged from the brush, right where we had been hiking, joining the other man at his side. Apparently he had been out there the entire time we were walking the trail, just watching us, following behind at a safe distance. The two of them talked for a long while, but we couldn't hear a word. They continued scanning the area, looking at our footprints, but eventually got in the truck and drove off down one of the forks in the trail. We sat in silence for a long time, waiting nearly 2 hours just to ensure the coast was clear, at which point we made like hell back to the car, down the canyon, and back to our campus, just in time for class.
I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It is a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of any ability to accomplish anything in your life if you stay there too long. Excluding the handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is Walmart, fast food companies, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there is a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and a lot of unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there are no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads, or just driving around on Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along these roads meant for 4x4s. Some of these people you'll see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by the ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it is still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at one another, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in that area. This was really the only camping spot that we were really familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it is getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPSs on our phones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service Rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like the 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck lights on so we could set up our tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there were a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying around on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. None of us thought that it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made some chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be bright light either, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we have all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and 2 of us, Jacob and I, decide to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have the bark knocked off in a circle around the trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seems strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock off the bark in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we were almost to the top of the hill, Jacob trips and yells, "Oh shit!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we didn't need to see what that light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlights and just use the moonlight to get us back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wear before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the side and peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rums and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? He says. We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all of our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you change jackets? Isaac said that he had been in the tent since we had left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it down with the sleeping bags inside. We all jump in the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking the path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but thankfully it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle's keeping pace. It doesn't get any closer though, it just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I started to drive everyone back to my house, but I decided to go a different route, just in case we were being followed. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I have driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it is always in that place. I would never go down that road ever again.